At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers here this evening. Atish Taseer is the author of the memoir Stranger to History, A Son's Journey Through Islamic Lands, and the acclaimed novels The Way Things Were, The Temple Goers, and Noon. His work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. He is a contributing writer for the International New York Times and lives in New York. He is, most recently, the author of The Twiceborn, Life and Death on the Ganges, now out in paperback. Our featured author this evening is Casey Schwartz. A graduate of Brown University, she holds a master's degree in developmental neuroscience and psychoanalysis from University College London. She is the author of 2 acclaimed books of nonfiction, Attention, a Love Story, and In the Minefields, Exploring the New Science of Neuropsychoanalysis. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, Newsweek, Departures, and New York, among other publications. She lives in New York City. Of course, the book we are here for is titled Attention, a Love Story. If you, like me, find yourself increasingly distracted by your phone, which has been even more amplified since the pandemic, I am very guilty of this. This book offers a wake-up call and a reorientation of what's important in our lives, of what we allow ourselves and choose to pay attention to. I'll leave you here with this one quote that as a bookseller makes me very happy. This is a quote from Vanity Fair about Casey's new book. Quote, Casey Schwartz's new book is helping me reevaluate my relationship with screens at a moment when I've never been more dependent on them. Closing the laptop, putting the phone in the other room, and curling up with this book has been the best part of my day, end quote. At this time, I'll now hand it over to Casey and Atish. Enjoy.
Casey, firstly, I mean, here we are at this 7 o'clock moment in New York City. This, like, from my window, I can hear people cheering for the healthcare workers. It's like, on one hand, like a desperately moving moment, but you know, your book, as I was reading it, like it's all about like us staring agog at our screens, and here we are, like with all the kind of surreality and the hard reality and the and we're sort of fixated on this. Like, you just had a baby, you've like got a book coming out. We thought it was going to be crazy under any circumstances. How are you? Like, I can't.
We didn't know we'd be talking to each other from our living rooms. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us, virtually joining us. And I so wish we could be in person. But Atish, you're so right that the contradiction of this moment is profound, that we are so utterly, crucially dependent on our technology right now. I mean, our livelihoods depend on our screens. Our communities now depend on our screens. But at the same time, I feel like it's never been more important to pick and choose what I'm ingesting on my phone in order to actually be able to function and get through each day.
Yeah.
So I think also, you know, these first few weeks have been about shock. And now we're kind of moving into, I think of it as kind of like a grim adaptation. And the question is, how do we want these next weeks and months to go? I'm hoping that I don't just spend this time just staring at my phone passively and hopelessly.
Right.
And it's not easy, and I totally understand the temptation.
I'm going to ask you to read something in a moment. I just wanted to ask before we get into anything, like, there's such a sort of deep unease about phones and technology in your book. At this moment, are you grateful that we can do this? Are you uncomfortable? Are you cautious? Like, what is your sort of analysis of how we should be living?
It's a plural of all of the above, because thank God I can FaceTime my mother every morning and show her the baby.
Right.
You know, because we can't actually go see her. You know, thank God I can see your face before me now on my computer in my living room. But again, I feel like if I were to just stare at Twitter all day, I would have such a nervous breakdown. I don't even know how I would get through this pandemic. So it's both.
I want you to like read a couple of paragraphs just to kind of give us the texture of your beautiful writing. And I'm going to say if you don't mind, I'm going to say something about the book in a second, but just to begin with, let's just hear the writing, because it really is, it's wonderful. It's like, you're always telling stories. It's so energetic. It's so tight. it's really beautiful prose. So if we can just like have a couple of paragraphs before we like get into the actual conversation.
Well, why don't I just read the first two paragraphs of the book? And they take place, I was 18 years old. I had just gotten to college, and well, I'll read it. This story begins with the Adderall. I am referring to the pills that entered my life as they did so many lives when I was 18 years old and stayed lodged there until I was 30. These pills seemed to offer me pure, distilled attention anytime I needed it, to compensate for whatever I imagined my deficiencies in that department to be. And like any love story, I remember everything about the moment it began. I was a freshman at Brown University. One night, still in our first term, I'd come to complain to a friend about the situation in which I found myself. An essay due the following afternoon on a book I had yet to read. All around us, her clothes were strewn messily on her dorm room floor. Do you want an Adderall? She asked. I can't stand them. They make me want to stay up all night doing cartwheels in the hall. Could there be a more enticing description? From a ball of tin foil, she pulled out a single pill, the deep bright blue of a cartoon sky. My hand shot out to receive it. I had come there merely to vent, but I left with my first Adderall, a medication prescribed for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, a condition I knew nothing about except for some vague awareness of classmates in high school who had needed extra time when taking their exams. I'll leave it there.
So one of the things that like I find just so marvelous about the way that this book is weighted is that there's this, on one hand, it's a drug that draws you, that makes you like attentive, that you become addicted to.
Right.
That is like the beginning of your story, but you end up as a student of distractedness. You know, and or distraction, and I think a couple of things I just want to ask right at the offset. Like, firstly, like, why were you so willing to take that drug? Would you have taken it if it was an illegal drug? And secondly, what was it about the kind of attention or the texture of the attention that this drug gave you that A, got you hooked, and B, that you realized was incredibly limiting? There was something very wrong with that kind of attention.
Right. I think for me and for so many other people, I mean, for thousands and thousands and thousands of people, Adderall and drugs like Adderall are incredibly seductive because they're legal and they sort of promise or offer achievement and success. They're not a drug where you're sort of bowing out of the system. You know, they're sort of marketed to say, oh no, here's how you can succeed and kind of, you know, get ahead. So it's like, it's a drug that's hooked into ambition. Right. And that was part of it. And for me, I mean, I'll never forget that first night in college, taking that first blue pill, staying up all night, feeling that there was nothing I couldn't master now. There was no tiredness, no lassitude that was going to get in my way. I mean, you could put any text in front of me, you know, I could master it. It could be physics, it could be anything. I sort of felt like all obstacles to comprehension were now removed. And so that was the great draw of Adderall for me. And but the whole time I had this sort of creeping sense and this creeping sensation, oh my God, this is the ultimate Faustian bargain, because, you know, the more time I spend on this drug, the more time I spend away from my authentic self. And I felt that self sort of shriveling up through the course of my 20s.
Interesting. What made you suspicious about that kind of attention that comes from taking a pill? Because, you know, like I remember like sometimes let's say like somebody like Gandhi, I remember my professor, I was like saying, like Gandhi had this program of dietetics and celibacy. And my professor once said to me, he said, you know, if Gandhi could take a pill and not feel sexual desire or not feel whatever, would it be enough? Or was it the fact that like, that he had to struggle with attention, or in his case, struggle with sexual desire? But were you alarmed by the fact that you could take a magic pill, or was it actually like something that was about this kind of attention that felt wrong to you? Like what was it? What were the limitations of the kind of attention that Adderall was giving you?
That I felt so nose to the grindstone, always in this kind of false urgency. You know, like I couldn't afford to just sort of laze around with my friends and laugh and converse. That there was this, I felt driven by this sort of alien force, that it wasn't porous to the world. It was closed down and kind of also ultimately kind of self-involved, because, you know, you sort of take yourself out of the environment you're in a certain way to be in your own chemical reality. So it's like you're less connected to the people you love and who are around you.
Was it, well, there are a couple of things that come up. This lovely quote from W.H. Auden: choice of attention, to pay attention to this and ignore that, is to the inner life what choice of action is to the outer. In both cases, a man is responsible for his choice and must accept the consequences, whatever they may be. This idea of free will, of in some ways like the idea of attention being connected to agency. Just tell me a little bit about that and tell me how you came to that, because one of the things that is like striking is that we've surrendered this. We've surrendered it without a fight. You know?
This was always what astonished me watching the rise of the iPhone in the last decade plus and its attendant technologies is that how complacent we've all been. And by the way, I count myself completely as a guilty party too. Like there was never a struggle to say, wait a minute, I don't want my brain steamrolled at all times by the content coming through my screen. It was this sort of, the opposite happened. It sort of felt, especially around sort of 2015, 2016, when I was beginning this book, that, oh, this is inevitable. Let's just give into it. And I think in the last year, there's been a slight backlash to that and a slight pushback. But this book in my head began, and this one thought I had, we've given our attention away so casually. That was the sentence that popped into my head. And it felt so tragic to me. This like utter nonchalance where we just thought, well, you know, it was as if there's nothing precious about our mental contents. We're so willing to just fork them over to Mark Zuckerberg or whoever, you know? And that's what got me onto this book, was the emotion surrounding that one thought.
Was it your relationship with addiction? Was it the fact that like getting onto this stuff was as easy as taking a little blue pill that kind of like filled you with horror, and you're like, God, like this is how quickly one loses like one sort of, I don't know, one's sovereignty over one's attention or one's ability to control how one thinks and the depth to which one thinks.
No, I've never thought of it quite like that, but that's really, really interesting. And, you know, I always was struck by the fact that, wow, it's fascinating that Adderall hit the American market 1996, which is basically when the internet started to creep into our lives. And the two of them just surged on the exact same timeline as if made for each other. You know, they both crept into our moment to moment lives on the exact same trajectory. And I always think about that. It's like, do we feel like we need help paying attention, you know, from pills more than ever as more and more screens infiltrate our lives?
Right. So there's this wonderful, and it's like one of the real pleasures of the book is that it's a kind of history of attention. Like there's a teleology. You begin in the 19th century with people like William James, who feel this deep modern anxiety, and it's almost like the business of losing one's ability to concentrate is kind of inextricably linked to the modern condition. And then for a little while, it falls away. It stops, like with the coming of Freud and psychoanalysis, the idea of choice gets separated from attention. And then once again, this business returns. I wonder if you could just walk me through, like, this business of finding your people, which is so fascinating. You find these people, Huxley, David Foster Wallace, Simone Weil, William James, and they're like all scattered around it. And what links them is that they're concerned with this thing that you're concerned with. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what the history of worrying about attention. Like, I feel like that like Calvin Hobbes, even my anxieties have anxieties. Like, what is the history of this? Like, because I think it is really fascinating.
Just in the briefest way, attention was never really sort of the star of the show as an intellectual subject until this kind of brief moment at the end of the 19th century. Or so Jonathan Crary, the art historian, has argued so persuasively, that as factories kind of sort of became this dominant, factor in the economy, and you had this utterly vigilant kind of attention paying when you're on a factory line, and you don't have to breathe for even 1 second. Attention kind of became this new subject of fascination for people like William James. And it was kind of thought about and written about by many of his contemporaries, and then faded away again in the 20th century when behaviorism rose up. Right. Because attention implies so much volition and so much agency that, person to person could be different depending on what they're paying attention to. That's not a behaviorist idea.
Right.
And then suddenly it became hip again and interesting again in the 1960s and 70s. But what was so surprising and interesting to me as I was reporting this book is that even today, we don't have clarity about attention. We don't really, if you talk to any neuroscientist who studies attention, they'll tell you, there's no real definition of attention. There's no sort of unifying definition of what it is. And, it's such a splintered field because it can mean visual attention. It can mean attention span. It can mean attention deficit. It connotes so many different meanings and functions that it kind of lingers on with a lot of ambiguity, even now.
Because there's this remarkable moment in your book where I think you are speaking, in fact, to a neuroscientist, and he says, like, you're sitting at dinner, you're checking your phone underneath, you're receiving news, like, about this and that thing or whatever. He's like, there's plenty of attention going on. And he's almost denying the fact that, which you bring up with almost like it's like kind of cri de coeur. Like, I can't fucking read a book anymore, like, but this very serious person is denying this effect that everyone knows. And so what is like, why is he wrong?
Well, that was actually, that's the wonderful Mark Stokes, is the head of the Oxford Attention Group. And I think, well, I wanted him to join me in my distress and say, you're right. The iPhone has ruined our concentration and ruined our minds. But it was, there's a real streak of agnosticism among scientists who are waiting for the proof and the evidence to say, yes, things are different now that we have this technology with us in our pockets. And that proof, that evidence isn't quite in yet. But yet you also have neuroscientists like Adam Gazzaley, who's quite well known. He's at University of San Francisco, and he's out there saying we are in a cognitive crisis. For him, the evidence is in. And, so it's like this interesting divide, even among the scientists who study attention and the brain. Have things changed since technology ramped up so drastically, or haven't they? That basic question has not been answered.
Yeah. one of the things I really loved was there's this moment where, because this is another real joy of this book, is like like I said earlier, you're a compulsive storyteller, and it's like you're always held by it page to page, but also like it's a very personal book. It's a book that's not afraid to deal with like your personal life, with your personal engagement. And one moment you're I guess you're in love, or maybe you're in obsession with somebody, and you kind of realize a relationship between this corrosive kind of attention and the love affair that you're in. And so I suppose just like unpack this thing. Why is obsession not the kind of attention you mean? Like, what is wrong with obsession? Like, what are we looking? What do we mean when we're talking about attention?
No, and I wouldn't want to cast aspersions about obsession, because, you know, God bless our obsessions as we go through life. I mean, I'm glad for them looking back on them. I wouldn't trade them in. But I remember that particular love affair was in the wake of the Adderall. And I came to realize the total obsession focus on this person in question had it was sort of took the place of the Adderall, because it was the same total hijacking of my own mind that I had felt while on these blue pills. This, you know, that it was sort of like another way to avoid looking at other aspects of my life. Now that I wasn't on the pill, I could just sort of focus on this guy.
So sorry, I'm just so fascinated. Like a writer who's obsessed with a book he's going to write. How is that different from this? Like, ask you is, what is sterile attention and what is fertile attention? What is creative? What is, because we're trying to get somewhere. Something has been lost. We're trying to get back to that. What for you is the marker? Like, what defines? Is it agency?
And I think we all sort of know it when we feel it ourselves, right? Is when you feel that you're not really in yourself, and you're not in your authentic self. You kind of know it. You kind of know, like, you're not coming from this deepest place of this real self. That's that. There's always a little alarm bell that goes off in your psyche, I think, or it has for me. That, you know, this isn't right, and this can't go permanently.
That's really nicely put, because actually we can sit here and try to find a workable definition, but you're right, it is at bottom something instinctive. And coming like on the back of that, I want to ask you a little bit about David Foster Wallace, because you do these beautiful, like, kind of creative reliving of both Huxley, of Foster Wallace, and their relationship, or their relationship with concerns that you share. I wanted to ask you about Foster Wallace because he's dealing with the American compulsive need for entertainment, and he talks almost like a premonition. He says that the technology is going to get so good, we're going to be like feeding off this information that's coming off our screens. And he says, but at bottom, we know, like, sorry, I'm going to actually just read you this 1 second because it's so nice. He says, like, this urge to shatter that silence, that boredom, to reach for our phones, our drugs, our achievement. Everyone knows it's about something else way down. What is that?
That to me was that's sort of, when I read that, and that comes from The Pale King, his last novel, it was sort of just sent chills down my spine, because I feel like when we talk about distraction and technology and screens and attention, there's this whole layer missing from the conversation. You know, it's not really just about, oh, I'm so distracted, I couldn't get through my inbox. It's about, what are we so desperate to avoid feeling or looking at in our own lives? And that became one of the most compelling questions of my book research, and what I was trying to at least pose as a question, because I don't think it can be universally answered. I feel like everyone could have a different version of an answer for themselves. But Wallace was obsessed with attention his whole life. And what's funny is that in 1996, in Infinite Jest, which was published in 1996, he imagined a technology exactly like Zoom, where you could be at home broadcasting to the world and put your own filter and your own mask on your face. And that would be how you would represent yourself, like with this tableau, this fake tableau to the world. So he was unbelievably prescient about the role that the internet would play in our lives. He had such a clear vision of what was coming.
Right.
And he felt, for him, the stakes of attention were so high because he felt that they could really, like, if you could just try to empathically imagine what other people's circumstances and predicaments were around you, you could leave your own little circumstance and enter such a richer way of living.
That's so interesting, because there's almost a sense that there's a kind of brutality or like a loss of empathy, certainly, in the way that we're being tuned or being conditioned into paying attention, that it is of utter self-absorption.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Just heads up, we'll wrap up in like maybe 5 minutes, then we'll go to the audience Q&A.
Oh, okay. I'm still full of questions. Okay, yeah, great. We'll do it in 5 minutes. I want to ask you like a couple of things that I'm really concerned about. One is that the traps of religion, like you write so well about Huxley, and in a funny way, David Foster Wallace also kind of flirts with this. In a dream world, the deepest form of attention is prayer, is that inner concentration, what the Buddhists call dhyan, like that deep inward. But these are problems created by technology. And when people find the solutions in religion, by which I mean also spirituality and mysticism, they stumble. So where do the solutions come from? Is it technology that proposes the solutions, or is it elsewhere?
No, I mean, that's such a huge question. And it's funny to grapple with it right now, as we're all looking for this sort of inner light to sort of push through this utterly unknown situation we find ourselves in. And, besides this interest in religion linking all four of the main writers and thinkers on attention that I included in my book, I also have recently realized that they were all four linked by huge crises and catastrophes in their own lives and their own obsession with attention as a sustaining lifeline, as a way to transcend the circumstances you're in. I see that as so connected to what they all endured. I mean, Simone Weil, who wound up sailing on a boat back into Europe as it was torn by World War II and dying of tuberculosis. And she so wanted to engage with the crisis of her moment. I mean, all the writers and thinkers included all went through these seismic disasters.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about them all so much and what they would have had to channel to get through this moment now.
Yeah. I want to end with this, because there's this part of the implication of your book is this sense also of a political consequence. And we have somebody in your book saying, without shared truths or shared facts, you get chaos and people can take control. And we've lived in this very like strange time where like there we are glued to our screens, and anything can happen in the world beyond. And now suddenly it's not like a game anymore. Here we are, like we can't go out into the street, like, the people, and we're not sure about the people who we chose to make these decisions, whether they're guiding us for the best. So I guess what I'm asking you is, like, we've talked about the loss of empathy. We've talked about distractedness, not even being able to read a book, this almost a kind of self-loathing that comes out of this. What are the political consequences of this conditioning?
Well, I think it's very clear that we no longer can even agree on what's true. I mean, look at what's happening even right now with the virus, that we can't even as a country accept that there is one, or that it's, how it's as serious as it is, that everything is up for debate, and there's no longer a sense of sort of a town square where we can all come together and say, yes, this is happening.
Right. Should we take some questions?
Yeah, let's go to the audience Q&A, and I've got a couple lined up here, but we'll go to the ask a question button first. And I should say to our viewers, if you have a question, feel free to ask. We do have some time here. So this one's from Barbara. Barbara says, if we don't take medications, what are practical steps we can take to pay better attention to life? And I'll even say even if we do take medications.
I feel like for me, the number one answer to that question is to be curious and to constantly try, even when it's very difficult, to cultivate curiosity. Because that's the most effortless kind of attention. You don't have to sort of force yourself into this rigid, studious pose towards the world. You can be fascinated. Even now, I'm kind of interested in seeing how are we going to get out of this. It's like, I'm interested in the details of this pandemic. I'm walking around the neighborhood noticing, oh, look, the tables are set for dinner at the Greek restaurant. And there's jazz playing at the upscale food store, even as the shoppers are running terrified with masks, as fast as they can. There's this sort of jazz meant to compel you to buy $20 cheese. It's like, I feel if you can get curious about what's happening, this attention just flows from you, and it's natural.
So this one's going to come from me. All right. So I'm curious what you found in your research that was especially impactful on the book. So obviously we mentioned William James, we mentioned David Foster Wallace, but was there something like a science journal, or was there a specific writer, a certain book that was basically the impetus that launched this book or this creative idea?
No, it was not launched by a specific book, but I think if anything, it was launched by having spent 10 years on Adderall, and therefore thinking a lot about attention and why did I value attention so highly? Why does it matter? Why does attention even matter? What are the stakes? And I think that was sort of the psychological background for the book. And then over the course of reporting, it's so hard to figure out which writers do you include in a book about attention, because every writer cares about attention. But suddenly, William James, David Foster Wallace, Simone Weil, and Aldous Huxley floated into my mind all in 1 week. I mean, William James is obvious because he famously wrote about attention, but the other three just floated into my mind in the same week as the obvious writers to include in this book, and it was sort of miraculous to get to spend so much time with their profound books.
Yeah.
So this next question is from Francine. They say, when you were on Adderall, did you notice that your mind was not wandering? Were you totally concentrating? And if so, do you miss that?
Oh, sure. I mean, do every once in a while, I think, my God, I would love an Adderall right now. Absolutely. I mean, it gives you boundless energy. You can sit for hours, but it's also this joyless focus. It's like you're not laughing, you're not available. You're not available if someone calls you and says, let's talk for a second. You're shut down. So that's remembering that quality is what has made it possible for me to just stay away from it.
And this next question is from me as well. So your book, one of my favorite books these days is one that I can't quite get around, like, what exactly is it? It like combines genres. And so your book, it starts off as very much a memoir, kind of dives into a little literary criticism, a little bit of science journalism. What made you want to write in that style?
I'm not sure. I feel, isn't it so, it's kind of the way that so much nonfiction is being written these days, is with the personal. Mm-hmm. And it comes so naturally. I love writing personally. I want the reader to know that I'm kind of in it with them. I'm not detached from the subject of attention, sort of weighing in with my reporting. It's sort of, I'm living it too. And I want them to feel that and see how attention is affecting the actual texture of my life.
This next question is from Claudia. They write, what are your thoughts of poetry as a hyper-focused art of attention?
Oh, Atish, why don't you answer that? Because
no, absolutely.
Right up this is squarely in your wheelhouse.
No, I'm the question asker here. You answer it.
Claudia, I think that's beautiful. I think that's beautifully said, because poetry just distills down to just the smallest way, these incredibly powerful thoughts.
Well, we do have to wrap up here shortly. Atish, do you have any other questions for Casey to kind of wrap this up?
Yeah, and this is not a profound like closing question, but I realize like I am kind of intrigued by it because and it's maybe a little bit like there's this very, very strong, very intense moment in the book where your father falls afoul of the Me Too movement, and you're suddenly as a woman, as a woman probably with great sympathy for the Me Too movement, like dealing with like the pain of someone who you love getting older and feeling a loss of purpose and tell me why you included it, why it was important, what was, why is it part of this book? Why is it integral to this book?
I love how you just slid this huge question in.
Well, it is an amazing chapter. Like, I mean, I adore that chapter. So I wanted to ask you about it just because, like, I don't want anybody to hear this conversation and go away without knowing that there's this incredible.
I'll answer as quickly as I can, which is that my father, Jonathan Schwartz, was wrapped up in the Me Too movement in 2017. And as a family, we lived this trauma of seeing our dad kind of disgraced. And the way that it played out online was so stunningly instantaneous that when later, a year or two later, I was reflecting on it, I thought, no, this does belong in this book. This is germane, because this is about how moral outrage can spread online and hijack our attention more powerfully than probably any other subject matter. Moral outrage is like this sort of has a biological pull on our attention in this really specific way. And so that's why I chose to include this story in the book.
And it consumed you, it was like you could,
Yeah.
And so I will interject here, Casey. We've had just kind of a flood of a few more questions here. So can you handle 3 more questions?
Sure, why not?
Time? All right, let's do it. The first one that I absolutely must read is from my friend Mitzi, and she says, as a student and practitioner of Zen Buddhism, so much of this reminds me of the quote-unquote monkey mind, as opposed to the practice of mindfulness, which can help us cultivate stillness. William James and many of the transcendentalists study these ancient concepts too. I'd be curious to know if either of you have studied Buddhism or mindfulness, and if meditation has played any role in your lives. Thanks.
It's a great question, and I had to make a choice because meditation is so complex, so rich, so many phenomenal books have been written about it. I felt like I can't really include it or write about it in the book without devoting myself to it for years, and that's not where I'm at with it. But it's an incredible tool, and there is so much to say about attention and meditation. And actually, I mean, Atish, you do practice it, don't you?
I don't, but like I'm a student of Sanskrit, and actually, like, I was completely, like, as much as you don't take it head on, you circle around it so much that, like, anyone with any kind of, like, there's a real gravitational pull towards that question and towards that subject. So I feel like it was uppermost in my mind as I was reading.
This next question is from Ron. Ron asks, do you feel you can handle challenges now better since you've had the experience of Adderall?
Yes. Thank you, Ron, for that question. I do, because it's really about asserting again and again in your own mind what you care about and what propels you through the day and motivates you. That's such a sustaining, it's such a source of inner fortitude if you can remember, no, this is what I care about. This is what I'm about. Even now, I mean, I'm thinking about that all the time.
Can I slip in a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Casey, I just wanted to ask you about this thing, like in a sense, like this is a technology. And when we were like writing was a technology. And when like writing comes into the world, you have this great anxiety among traditional cultures about like losing oral culture. And at the same time, like writing is assimilated and we move on as a race or humanity or whatever. Like, are your fears existential, or do you think like we're going to get our head around this and it'll be part of our lives and we'll find the right place for it and we'll be okay?
I hope so. And of course, yeah, there's always that hand wringing with the introduction of a new technology. And a lot of people dismiss this idea that phones and computers are fundamentally changing us by citing, the Gutenberg press, the printing press, the invention of writing. They sort of point to these massive disruptions in the past to say, we're fine, don't worry about it. But I think, for me, it's like, I don't want to live my life according to the rhythms of Silicon Valley and according to the content and flavor. Those are not the people that I want defining my inner life. I don't know about you. And so that is for me why this is existential.
Right.
We'll go to our last question here. This is from Katie. You mentioned that you felt ambition and success were tied to attention during the 90s, taking Adderall. In today's age of distraction and multitasking, do you think Americans still see attention as a critical building block of success?
That's such a smart question. It's so interesting. Right, because the old model of like scholastic attention, where you're just like sitting in a room trying to master something, is kind of dated. And now there's this sense of like, okay, can you fly between tasks? Well, I mean, that's the marker of success now. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure what the answer is, except to note that, yes, I think that our conception of proper thought has definitely shifted away from that model of sustained attention. That's really, really interesting.
Well, at this time, I think we need to wrap up. I want to finish.
Just before
okay.
you, I just want to say one
go.
thing. Like it's just, this is an amazingly meta book. I mean, while you're reading it in this moment, you feel it speaking to you. You're like reaching for your phone as there's like almost this little scolding voice saying like, well, you're about to do that, aren't you? And it's just, I find it like so closely linked to this moment. So I mean, I know, Casey, that you're publishing at a very strange time, but I just want to like reassure you that your book speaks so directly to this time. And like, really, I wish it every success, because it's absolutely the most urgent kind of book one could read at this time.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Atish, for interviewing. This was a wonderful conversation. To all our viewers out there, if you go to our website or click the link below, purchase Casey's book. It's great. It's fantastic. You certainly won't regret it. And thank you again, Casey and Atish, for giving us your time. Everyone, stay safe, stay home. Have a good night.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.